You have a choice to make this morning, as I do, with everything in our life right now that we don't like. That includes people that we are frustrated with, and we don't know what to do. And here are the choices. Fight, meaning I'm going to fix it. Second, flight, meaning, I'm just going to run. Or faith, I'm going to trust God with that situation. And we will choose one of those. They're all in the text. It's the story of Jesus in the garden. He has embraced the cup. He has said, not my will, but thy will be done. He tells the disciples, once he wakes them up, let's go. The betrayer is at hand. The betrayer shows up, and when the betrayer kisses him and the soldiers grab Jesus, one of the disciples wasn't ready to embrace the cup. No, he wanted to fight. He wanted to fix it. So he draws a sword, and he cuts the guy's ear off, and Jesus turns and says, put your sword up. I learned one of the greatest lessons when God spoke to me out of this text about how to deal with the stuff that happens in our life. You do know, no matter how strong a believer you are, stuff happens, right? I'm just using a nice word for it. Stuff happens. Now, if you're Buddhist, it's not really stuff. If you're Hindu, this stuff has happened before. If you're Unitarian, just be tolerant of it. If you're Catholic, you probably deserve the stuff that's happening to you. If you're Presbyterian, this stuff was bound to happen to you. It was part of the preordained will of God. But if you're Baptist, if you'll send us $29.95, it won't happen to you. Now, that's kind of been our approach, right? Oh, no, if you do these things, 1, 2, 3, and that doesn't happen. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Chuck Swindoll made a statement one time, life is 10% what happens, 90% how we respond to it. 10% what happens, 90% how we respond. Let me tell you where my worst mistakes come. Not the 10%, the 90%. In other words, the most difficult seasons of my life were not the 10% of things I had no control over. No, it was the 90% that I had control over how I responded. You can't control the 10%. Stuff is going to happen, but you control how you respond to it. And I have made the worst, most stupid, idiotic responses that cost me. And that's exactly what this story is about, is how to trust Him and how to put up the sword, how to lay down the sword. So I want you to read with me the story found in Mark. It's found in the others as well. In fact, it's found in all of them. But let's read Mark chapter 14, verse 43. And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, the one I kiss is the man. Seize him, lead him away under guard. And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi. And he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword, struck the servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. You need to write the word Simon Peter. That's who did it. And Mark won't tell us because we think Mark was real close friends with Simon Peter. And so maybe he just protected the guilty. It was Simon Peter, drew his sword, struck the servant of the high priest, cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, have you come out as against a robber, with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching. You didn't seize me, but let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they all left him and they fled. When we don't like the cup, when we don't like it for somebody we love, Jesus embraced it. He said, not my will, but thy will be done. Not Simon Peter. No, Simon Peter represents our most natural response. We're going to fight to fix it. It's not right. Now, it wasn't his motive that was wrong. His motive was right. Think about it. What was happening was not fair. What was happening to Jesus was not fair. It wasn't right. His motive was, I want to fix, I want to help. But his method was wrong. He grabbed a sword. And he said, I'm going to fix this. And what does he end up doing? Making a mess. Making a mess. He cuts a guy's ear off. Okay, we know that guy's name. His name was Malchus. He was a servant of the high priest. And don't think for a minute Peter was just wanting to clip his ear. No. He wanted to cut his head off. It just Malchus moved or whatever, and he just got his ear. Did you know what Luke tells us, the doctor? This is so cool. Luke, when he records this, he says what Jesus did. Jesus went over. He picked the ear up off the ground after Peter has cut it off. He picks the ear up, puts it on ice in an igloo. They rush him to the hospital, and they were able to attach the ear again. Is that what he did? No. He reaches down, puts it on. Just like Jesus coming behind his children, cleaning up the mess. Every time you think, I'm going to help Jesus, he's going to have to clean up a mess. Every time you think, oh, I'm going to help fix this, I'm going to make it right, I promise you, he's about to have to clean up a mess. And he's been doing it for a long time. Our natural impulse, our first impulse. Listen to what John MacArthur said. The church has never made advances by physical warfare. Every time it has tried, the cause of Christ has been severely harmed. How many people on Facebook, how many people on social media, how many people have been left in our wake because we tried to fix something? We tried to correct or save the day. Put the sword up. And every one of us has a sword. I got a big one. This is the Braveheart sword. This is the one, a replica of the one Mel Gibson carried in the movie Braveheart. It's got Ephesians 6:13. This was given to me by a very, very dear friend, a surgeon. When he gave it to me, I'm like, oh, so this is what you use in surgery? Thank you. No, it's a sword that is in my office, and it reminds me of several things. But one of the things it reminds me of, I have a sword. So do you. Sometimes our sword is our mouth. Sometimes we think we can say something that's going to fix somebody. If we just say the right thing, it's going to fix it. And so we approach it like, I'm going to get the sword out. I'm ready. My tongue, I will absolutely fix this. No, you won't. You will make a mess. And Jesus will have to come and heal somebody that you cut with the tongue. Sometimes it's our written word. You post something. You send an email that you regret sending. And you send it because something wasn't right, and you're going to fix it, right? Your words are going to change the heart of everybody who reads them. Sometimes even on Facebook or sometimes in social media, you'll see a post and it's not right. You'll read a blogger and you don't like what he said about Jesus, so you're going to save Jesus. You're going to save the day, and you're going to come to the aid of Jesus. And so you read a stream and you read a thread of just a bunch of stuff that's coming out of your mouth and everybody else's mouth, and what does it do? It only makes it worse. All of us have a sword. For some of us, it's power. For some of us, it's influence. You have people that work for you. And every once in a while, you use that power to try to fix something because you have authority over them. You have a power over them. Parents do it all the time. We use our power. We use our influence, not because we think it's the best thing, but it's the way to get our way. Can I just be real confessional? This sword probably is the size it needs to be because I have a really big sword that I've used in the past that unfortunately one day I will give account to God. I have asked forgiveness, I've confessed, and here it is. It's this pulpit. Let me explain that. There was a season in my life where I used the pulpit to beat people up. I used the pulpit to get my way. I used the pulpit to correct people. And I'm not the only one. It happens every weekend in this country. There are preachers who stand in this pulpit and they're angry and they yell and they scream and they're venting and they're after somebody. We were talking among the pastors here, and one of our pastors said one day he preached and They were at lunch. He asked his wife, how was the sermon? She looked at him and she said, who are you mad at? Another one of our pastors said, his wife said, honey, why don't you watch the video? Watch the video. You never smile when you're preaching. So let me smile. But for many of us, this can be a sword to where I think I'm going to convince you to do something. I'm going to fix you with words. That's not how it works. But every one of us want to draw the sword, and the best thing you can do is put the sword up. The best thing you can do is surrender. The best thing you can do is say, Jesus, here it is. And I'm going to give you 3 words that will prove the greatest thing you can do is surrender. They're the words Jesus gave Peter. Now, we don't have them in Mark. Mark did not include these. So I want you to go to Matthew 26. Because Matthew tells us what Jesus said to Peter. After he struck the servant with the sword, he looks at Peter and he tells him something. I'm going to read verse 52, Matthew chapter 26. Then Jesus said to him, put your sword back into its place. For all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Let me just stop there. All who take the sword will perish by the sword. The first word I want you to write down is the word practical. This is just good, practical advice. If the only way you know how to deal with people and circumstances that you don't like is with a sword, sooner or later, you're going to die on that sword. You're going to run into somebody bigger than you. You're going to run into something you can't fix, and you're going to die on your own sword. Jesus just said, if you live by it, you're going to die by it. He's basically saying the sword doesn't work. It doesn't work. Husbands, quit trying to fix your wife. Wives, quit trying to fix your husband. Parents, quit trying to fix your children. We use the sword in relationships thinking we're going to fix somebody. We're not going to fix anybody. We're going to destroy relationships. We're going to die by our own sword, and our relationships are going to die by our own sword. You realize the only one who can fix anyone is Jesus Christ. And it is the power of the Holy Spirit in them that changes the heart. Now, we lead them, we parent them, we love them. Billy Graham's wife, Ruth Graham, when she was living and Billy was living, somebody asked her one day, said, it must be tough keeping Billy Graham straight. And she goes, that's not my job. My job is to love Billy Graham. It's God's job to make him good. And what a beautiful answer to that. I can't make him good. I can't make him right. And see, we think we can fix somebody. So it's only natural we grab that sword and we go off on somebody. How many times have we let anger and rage and we rant and we yell and we scream thinking it's going to change the heart of a child or the heart of a spouse? It's not going to change anything. It's going to cut somebody that Jesus has to come and heal. So you see, whenever he says it's practical, if you live by it, you're going to die by it. I've actually had people say, well, I'm not forgiving them. It's the only power I have over them. I'm not forgiving them, Pastor. And I'm like, really? That's your sword. You're not going to forgive them. And you think that's going to hurt them? No. You're going to die on that sword. You're unwilling to forgive them. It's like you drinking poison waiting on them to die. They're not going to die. You're going to die. So Jesus' word is so practical this morning. Put the sword up. If it's the only way you know how to live, you're going to die that way. Second word is the word power. Power. I love what Jesus said to Peter. Peter, do you not think that I can call on my Father and he will at once give me 12 legions of angels? In other words, Peter, have you forgotten who I am? Have you forgotten who my Father is? Can I show you the power of Jesus? I think sometimes we forget. I mean, we really think he needs our sword. We think the kingdom's in trouble. We think Jesus is about to collapse, and so we're going to save the day with our sword. Let me show you how powerful he is. Let me show you the power of his name. When they got to the garden, according to John's gospel, there was a cohort of soldiers. You know how many a cohort is? It's 600 soldiers. I always thought it was just a handful of soldiers. Not according to John's gospel. There's 600 at least that come in the garden. Okay, here they are, and they come to Jesus, and Jesus goes, hey, who are you guys looking for? And they said, well, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. Watch what he says next. And when Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Uh-oh, they tripped. I'm sure they just got hung up on a root of one of those old olive trees and 600 men fell down at the same time. You know why they fell down? The power of his name. When Jesus said, I am he, boom, they fall down. Yeah, let's just give him praise. Let's just thank him for the power of his name. That's awesome. That's one of my favorite parts of the story. How Jesus knocked them down with his name. So do you really think with a name like that, your sword's going to help him? No. What else? The power of his presence. You know what he said to him? He said, I've been in your temple courts every day and you didn't grab me. Why do you come out after me like a robber? I'm not a robber. I was right there with you and you didn't touch me. You know why they didn't touch him? They couldn't. Because the power of his presence, he was not to be touched until it was time for him to surrender. There's just something majestic and powerful about his presence. And then the last thing is prayer. He said, do you not think I can ask my Father? And he will give me 12 legions of angels. Now let's think about this a second. Here's Peter standing here with a sword. Okay? He's got a sword. I'm going to tell you, his sword is probably real short. They carried small swords. It wasn't this big, I can tell you that. By the way, y'all picked a bad day to sit on the front row. I'm just warning you. So he's standing there holding his sword, and Jesus looks at him and says, Peter, let me tell you something. I can ask my Father right now. He'll give me 12 legions of angels. You know how many 12 legions? A legion is 6,000. Somebody do the math. 6,000 times 12 is what? 72,000. Good for you. 72,000. You were in the earlier service. 72,000, right? 72,000 angels would show up just like that. And Peter's got a sword, and he's going to save the day. You know what else? The Old Testament tells us in 2 Kings that one angel could destroy 185,000 soldiers. One angel. So now do the math. Multiply 185,000 times 72,000. And I'll save you the math. You get this number, 13.3 billion. 13.3 billion. You know how many are on the planet today? Today, not then, today. About 7.5 billion. He could destroy the earth twice. And Peter thinks he's going to help him with a sword. In that day, there were only 300 million. So if you do the math there, Jesus is saying, my angels that I could ask for in a heartbeat could destroy the population of the planet 43 times. And yet Peter is going to bring a sword. Do you see the power of our God? You see the power of Jesus? You see the lunacy? It's crazy for us to think that our sword will make a difference. You trust him. You know why? His sword's a lot bigger. He's a lot stronger. He is a lot greater. So why would we want to bring a sword when we serve the creator of the heavens and the earth who has all power, and he winks and everything is destroyed? That's the power of God we've got to trust in, not our sword. And then the last word, plan. What Jesus says is, let the plan be accomplished. I mean, it's a very simple, just let the plan be accomplished. Let what the scriptures say be fulfilled. What Peter didn't know is that he was fighting against the very plan God had for Jesus. In fact, Luke says he was fighting against the cup that Jesus had already decided, not my will, but thy will be done. So actually, Simon Peter was trying to save Jesus from Jesus' will, from God's will. So here's a thought. Could it be that that person that's driving you crazy is a part of God's plan? Could it be that that job that you hate, that circumstance, is a part of God's plan to make you more like Christ? Is it possible That thing that you're in, that situation, God is using it and He wants to use it. He's allowing it for you to grow in your faith and trust? Yes. How many times have we fought against things that God had allowed? You ever heard of heavenly sandpaper? God has heavenly sandpaper. We don't like to be, the sandpaper just kind of rubs and it literally takes bits and pieces of us off. But all God is doing is trying to shape us and make us more like His Son. I had one of those. And I was just the craziest thing happened today. The one that I remember, my first church, I'd been pastor there 6 weeks, and the deacon said, I'd like to have lunch with you. We had lunch, and the deacon of the church looked at me and said, one of us is leaving. Now, I'd been there 6 weeks. He'd been there 60 years. I'm thinking, wonder which one of us he's talking about. And I said, you talking about me? He said, yes. And I said, what's wrong? He said, you don't love us. I said, sure I do. He said, no, you don't. You don't even know us. And you've come in and you said, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And you've come in to fight and to preach against all this. You don't even know who we are. And I looked at him, his name was Watson. I said, Watson, would you give me another chance? And he said, I will. He was a builder. He was a house builder, a contractor, general contractor. And I asked him, could I build houses with him? He said, absolutely. For 3 years, I built houses with him, and he taught me how to love. And let me tell you how the prayer was answered. I asked Jesus, I said, Jesus, show me how to love. I just want you to show me. Well, one of the crews I worked on was roofing crew, led by a guy named Fred, who Fred was his son. Fred was the most incredible roofer I've ever seen, and he roofed drunk every day. Every Saturday night, there'd be a knock at the little parsonage where I was staying. I wasn't married at the time. I'm trying to come up with a sermon for Sunday morning. It's Saturday night. It's late. I hear a knock at the door. It's always Fred. And he's always drunk. I say, Fred, come on in. Fred stumbles in. And here we go. He's ranting about something. He didn't like clapping in church. I mean, he'd just go off on this and that and whatever. And I just finally learned just to listen and keep working on whatever. Well, this morning, I visited with a guy that I love dearly, and I've done everything I can to help him. He'd had a few drinks before he got here. And have y'all ever had a smell take you back to a place? When I smelled that alcohol, I went back to a Saturday night. I went back to that first church. And I remember one night Fred comes in, and he sits down, and he goes, hey, preacher, I figured something out. And I said, what have you figured out, Fred? He said, I'm called. I said, wait a minute. You're called? Who called you? He said, God called me. I said, what did God call you? What did he say? Oh, he gave me a calling. I said, oh, so you have a calling now. What is that calling, Fred? And he looked right at me and he said, to test preachers. I said, well, Fred, hey, you're doing a great job of that, man. You're doing great. I kept asking the Lord to remove him. I kept saying, God, can you get rid of this guy? It's driving me nuts. At Christmas time, his wife would call on Christmas Eve. David, can you come help put the toys together? He's drunk. He's passed out in the back. And I spent more than one Christmas Eve night, helping him. But you know what I remembered? That's what I prayed. God, show me how to love people. To this day, the person I wanted God to remove out of my life was a part of God's plan. Now, I don't mean him being drunk was a part of God's plan, but him being in my life in that state because God was showing me how to love like Jesus. And this morning, of all mornings, I hadn't seen this guy in a long time. He walks up to me, and it flashed me back to that one moment with Fred. I'm telling you, there are people in your life, there are situations, you don't like them, you don't want them, you're praying against them, you're asking God to remove them. What if he's using them? What if that's his plan? So put your sword down. Jesus never asked us to pick up a sword. The only thing he ever asked us to pick up, what was it? A cross. The only thing he ever told us to take up was what? A cross. You remember what Jesus said? If any man would come after me, Let him deny himself, take up his sword, take up his cross, and follow me. And you know how hard that is? I'd rather have a sword in my hand than a cross. Because a cross means I die. A cross means I don't have a say. I don't have an answer. I can't fix anything. A cross means I'm crucified with Christ, but I'm still living. But this life I live, it's Jesus living in me. A cross means I am not in it for me. I don't fix anything. I just follow Jesus. That's what he asked us to take up. And when he took the sword away, what was the last verse we read? And they all left him and deserted him. Verse 50 back in Mark. And they all left him and fled. Isn't it amazing? You take our sword away, we're out of here. Why? Because we're vulnerable. I mean, it's like we don't have anything. How do we fight? How are we going to do anything? Jesus said, trust me. And they left. There's even 2 verses I didn't read. Look at verse 51. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body, and they seized him. But he left the linen cloth, and he ran away naked. Who in the world is this? You know who I think it was? I'm going to show you who I think it was. You see the name at the top of the page when your Bible's open to the Gospel of Mark? That's who it was. It's the only place this is recorded. No other gospel writer records it, just Mark, and he does it in such a way. I think it was a young man named Mark who followed Jesus, who wrapped himself up in a bed sheet that night, and he's standing there or he's hiding, and all of a sudden, when he can't be hidden, they grab him, and he leaves everything behind. I just think that one of the things you and I have to face is flight. Some of you want to walk away today. Some of you want to get out of here so fast because the thought of surrendering your sword, no, you're not interested. Some of you want to walk away from God. Why? Because you don't want to surrender. You want control. I want to still control my life. I want to be able to have some say. And the thought of surrendering everything, no way. Let me tell you, it'll be the greatest decision you ever make. Because some of you, like me, the only way you know how to get through life is to force things. See, when I was a kid, I don't know why, I can't explain it. I was angry at God. I was angry at my parents. I was at student camp with Rachel a couple of nights ago, and I was watching those kids worship, and I just kept thinking to myself, I wish I'd been like that when I was their age. You know what happened to me at camp when I was their age? I got in a fight. I was playing basketball, and this kid kept hitting me. He couldn't block my shot, and he'd come up behind me and just hit my head. And finally, he knocked me out of bounds into a fence. And when I came off the fence, I said, I've had enough of this. And man, I threw a haymaker. I mean, it was like I was ready to kill him. And they throw me out of the game. My dad's the preacher. How you think that went over? But it was my way of dealing with it. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've ruined every relationship you've touched. Why? Because you only know how to fight. And today, the greatest thing you can do is surrender. Simon Peter, the guy who fought, the guy who had the sword, let me show you what he wrote years later. Let me show you what he wrote after Jesus worked on him a little bit and after Jesus changed him. This is from the book 1 Peter. Look at what he wrote. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. That's Simon Peter. It said Jesus gave us an example to follow. Trust the one who judges justly. Lay the sword down. You don't need it. You just say, Lord, here I am. I'm going to trust you. Not only will your relationships be better, your work will be better, you will be better. And everything will work the way God intended it to work when you lay down the sword.